Hi all, this is the badging video for the jewelry area here at MakeHaven. So we're gonna go inside the jewelry area. As you probably noticed, it's surrounded by a plastic curtain. This is to help distinguish this area from the rest of the shop, and also to keep the things in here and keep the things out there. So we're gonna quickly run through the basics of using this area, and we're gonna start with the different things that should stay in here and the things that should stay out there. So in here are precious metals, nothing ferrous, and probably not even aluminum. So ferrous metals, things like steel, stainless steel, cast iron, are much harder than the precious metals, and so it's important that those all stay outside of this area. So absolutely no working with ferrous metals in here. If you think there's a tool in here that you want to use for that, then you need to find it somewhere else. If we don't have it outside, then we can get one for the outside area, but these are exclusively for use in this jewelry area. So you can't take the tools here out to use outside, and you can't take things from outside to use in here. They need to stay separate. So that is number one. Then in terms of safety, you need to make sure that your hair is secured, and hair secured and eye protection is required in general in the metal and wood shops, but just reinforcing that in here in this jewelry area. When you're using the flex shaft or the polisher, or using fire, make sure that any dangling jewelry, ties, earbuds, etc. is tucked out of the way. Then there's sometimes where you will want to use a dust mask. A mask that you might be wearing for COVID will also probably suffice, but you could wear a sealed respirator also if you wanted, or an N95 or some other more appropriate mask. So when you're using the buffing station, that puts out fine dust, and that's a good time to use a mask. Sometimes when you're using the flex shaft, it'll be throwing out dust, and that's also a good time to wear a mask so you aren't breathing that in. Then we'll get into some more tool-specific rules for this space. If you have jewelry experience, this might sound familiar. If you don't, then pay closer attention. So files, some of which you have hanging up on the wall here, are for pushing. So when you run your hand backwards on them, you can feel them grip. When you can slide easily this way. That means they only cut when you're pushing, and you want to make sure not to back drag, because it can damage the files. All of these hammers have really nice surfaces on them, and they'll only stay nice surfaces if they only hit things softer than them. So make sure they're only hitting precious metals. If you take this brass hammer and hit it on this steel vise, it'll get damaged. It'll leave a dent in it and then be less useful. So make sure that when you're hitting things with any of the hammers or mallets, you're not hitting onto steel, you are hitting onto the material that you're trying to work. Speaking of the steel surfaces, like the vise or the bench pins over here, you need to make sure that water doesn't get on them, because they will rust. So make sure to keep them dry. If you have a wet piece, make sure to dry it off before it goes onto the steel surfaces. Another steel surface that you don't want to hit with a hammer are these mandrels. They're meant to be really smooth because that's where you're shaping your rings or bracelets over. So make sure that they don't get dinged up by a steel or any other kind of mallet. For the flex shaft, which we have here, the pedal is down underneath, and there's no power switch, so it's important to unplug the flex shaft when you're not using it, so that no one accidentally steps on the pedal and turns it on. So here, just make sure that this is unplugged when you're done. We have burrs here, and there are a few more up in here. Make sure to use the burr lube when you are using burrs. That will help them last much longer. So that is important. Speaking of wax, there are some tools for working with wax. For example, the wax ring sizer. We have some wax files. Those are exclusively for use with wax. If you try to use those on metal, they will dull very quickly and not be any good anymore. Similarly, for most of these tools, you want to make sure that you aren't using them on wax. So wax tools are for wax, and non-wax tools are for non-wax. Down here in these cabinets, we have the dapping blocks and gloves. So if you want to make sure your hands don't get cut, you can use these cut-resistant gloves. Next door down, we have the butane torches and extra butane. When you are filling up the torches with butane, you take the cans of butane and put the tip in the hole right in the bottom. Make sure that the can is upside down, pointing downwards instead of right side up. The butane is heavier than the air, so you want to make sure it's all going down into the can and out of the extra bottle. Speaking of when you're using the flame, you want to make sure to have the fire brick under whatever we're working on. So here's a tray and then some different soldering pads. Make sure to protect this lovely table that we have by using the trays and pads to not burn the table and obviously not burn yourself as well. Then in this drawer we have extra pickling acid as well as flux. In the pickling pot, you need to make sure to only use copper tongs. Don't put anything ferrous in that pot or it will ruin everything else that gets put in there. Over here we have the buffing wheel. It's important to make sure that the kind of rouge is maintained, or the kind of buffing compound is maintained for each wheel. They don't get mixed up, so that things aren't, getting cross-contaminated. So in this bag we have the red compound wheel, and this you have the gray compound wheel. And then when you want to swap, say this was loaded up with red compound, but you wanted to use the yellow wheel, then you would swap it and make sure to put this one into the red compound wheel bag. Over here at the rolling mill, when you're using it, make sure not to use ferrous metals, which at this point should go without saying. If you are using a ferrous stamp, like if you're using a steel stamp to make an impression into your softer piece of metal, you need to make sure to sandwich that piece of metal with copper plates to protect the rollers from getting dinged up by those impression plates. And sometimes these rollers might get crooked, or you might want to exchange the rollers on the sides. Before making adjustments like that to the rolling mill, please make sure to talk with a facilitator. For this is the investment cash sting machine. This has a separate badge, and the flex shaft has a separate badge. So before you use either of those, just make sure to watch the video, do the quiz, and the checkout if necessary for those tools. In terms of consumable items, like the tips for the flex shaft, solder, or some metals to practice with, we have some here available in the area and also available in the store for purchase if you want to make sure that they are new and fresh. As you can see, everything here has a really nice labeled home, and when you're done, you need to make sure that everything ends up exactly where it began. Everything is clean, you've cleaned off the surfaces. If you have dust left in the dust trays, make sure to clean that out so that it doesn't get mixed up with other people's metal filings. And if you have any questions, make sure to ask them of our great facilitators here in the jewelry area. Thanks for watching.